Aparna, we're live now.
Hello everybody, Andarki Namaskaram. I'm Dr. Aparna Vapaka. On behalf of Telugu Association of Greater Boston and North America Telugu Society, I welcome you all to this session on the coronavirus pandemic, vaccination and beyond. About a year ago, the WHO declared the novel coronavirus outbreak a global pandemic. After a year of illness, death, social disruption, and sacrifices beyond our imagination, now we have robust vaccines for the virus, and the end appears to be in sight. In the last 3 months, the USA has administered over 100 million vaccines, and over 10% of the population are completely vaccinated. And this past week, President Biden announced his goal of making all Americans eligible to get the vaccine by May 1st and expressed his hope for life returning to normal by July 4th. Well, we're all very excited and hopeful for the future. There are some lingering questions and concerns about the vaccines, and especially what the future holds for us. So today, I'm very pleased to have a discussion on these topics with 3 experts who have literally been on the front lines in research, education, and treatment of the virus. So we have with us Dr. Mahendra Devo, Dr. Anish Mehta, and Dr. Rahul Ganatra. Dr. Devo is the principal scientist and founding member of Expansion Technologies in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is an affiliate scientist at MIT. His group has done research on treatment options for coronavirus. He has extensively talked in India and the USA, raising awareness about the virus, and was honored as a COVID warrior by the state government of Karnataka. Next, we have Dr. Rahul Ganatra. Dr. Ganatra is an instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School and the director of continuing medical education at the VA Boston Healthcare System. He's a frontline internal medicine physician at the VA Boston. He specializes in teaching interpretation of medical literature and is a critical appraisal correspondent for the Curbsiders, an internal medicine podcast. And then last but not the least, we have Dr. Anish Mehta. Dr. Mehta is an associate professor of medicine at Emory University School of Medicine and chief of the infectious diseases service at Emory University Hospital. His research focuses on viral immunology, and he's an affiliate faculty at the Emory Vaccine Center. Dr. Mehta has been on the forefront of COVID treatment and research in the USA and has extensively spoken to the media and community about coronavirus treatment, prevention, and vaccination. So today the plan is to have a roundtable type discussion with our panel. To our audience watching on Facebook, YouTube, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat section and we'll tackle them at the end of the discussion. Also, we want to remind our viewers that today's program is our experts' advice and opinion and not designed to take the place of a visit with your physician. Without further ado, let's get started talking to our stellar panel. So I'm going to start with Dr. Devo and ask him a few questions about vaccine development and safety. Dr. Devo, now we have 3 vaccines approved for use in the USA from Moderna, Pfizer-BioNTech, and Janssen Pharma. Let's start with the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines. These are the first ever mRNA vaccines approved for use for any disease. Could you explain to our audience what this mRNA platform is, how these vaccines work, and why they are safe to take?
Sure. Thank you so much for your kind introduction, Dr. Aparna. And first of all, I would like to thank all the organizers from TAGB as well as NATS for giving me today this opportunity. Thank you so much. Good morning to the US audience and good evening to the Indian audience. I'm happy to answer all your questions. So first, so there are 3 approaches making the vaccines: classical, conventional, and next generation platforms. In the classical approach, we use attenuated virus, which is a weakened virus, or inactivated virus, a killed virus, to develop the vaccine. That's one of the approaches. Second is we use a part of the virus, such as spike protein, protein-based approach, and the virus particles can be decorated with a spike protein to develop the vaccine. This is the second approach. The third approach is next generation platform. So the vaccines that you just mentioned from Moderna and Pfizer comes under this next generation platforms, where deliver the genes associated with these particular viruses. So in the Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech case, we take these mRNA that encoding a particularly a total spike protein of this coronavirus and encapsulate into a lipid nanoparticles and deliver them into the body. Once it goes inside the body, the mRNA translates into spike protein, which means mRNA makes spike protein in the cells of the body, and then that comes outside the cell, decorates the spike protein, the cell with the spike protein, which resembles the virus. When this spike protein comes out of the cell, the immune system recognizes it and then activates the immune cells, which produces neutralizing antibodies as well as memory T cells, which retains in the body months to years to fight with the virus when the real virus comes into the body. That's how these mRNA vaccines are developed, and that's how they work. Yeah, like you said, these are the first therapeutics or vaccines that are developed using the mRNAs. Yes, we don't have a large commercial experience with these vaccines, but we have a large amount of safety experience because these mRNA therapeutics and mRNA-based therapeutics or vaccines are under development from past several years. Because the genome sequencing started from past 20 years. There's a huge, lots of rapid developments are being happen in this field. So we have a tremendous amount of data that suggests these are safe, but we still need some commercial experience, which we will gain with the time in the future.
Thank you. How about the J&J vaccine? How does that work? How is that different from the mRNA vaccines?
Yes, yeah, the J&J vaccine also comes under this next generation platform vaccines. So in the next generation platform vaccines, when I said we deliver the genes, we can utilize either DNA or mRNA to deliver the gene into the human body, right? So Moderna and Pfizer, they pick the mRNA. But the other method is using the viral vectors. So some normal common cold viruses you use. For example, in J&J, they used the adenovirus vector, which is a human adenovirus vector type 26. So this is a replication incompetent. That means it cannot replicate, it cannot reproduce when it goes inside the body. All it does is delivers the gene that is encoding the spike protein of the coronavirus. In simple terms, if you say we are utilizing this as a vehicle, for example, like a FedEx vehicle to deliver the parcel, that's what we're using this adenoviral vector into the human body. So again, same thing. Once the gene is delivered, the DNA becomes mRNA, which is a transcription call. Then mRNA becomes the spike protein. Similarly, like spike protein comes out of the cell, and then immune system activates the antibodies and the immune cells.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about mRNA,
this is also the safety. When you talk about the safety, again, we also have tremendous amount of, from past 30 years, there's a lot of research going on using adenoviral vectors to develop therapeutics as well as vaccines. So we have tremendous amount of data that suggests they are safe.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about mRNA and DNA, one of the concerns that public has is, are these going to stay in my, get integrated into my DNA? Are they going to get transmitted to my, to my kids? Is there a danger of that happening?
That's a great question. Yes, there's a lot of people think that, the residual mRNA is going to stay in the body or integrates is going to into the body. So that's usually not going to happen, because when you deliver the mRNA inside the body, there is enzymes called nucleases. They will act immediately onto the mRNA, naked mRNA. When they see the mRNA, they'll chew them up. They just digest them away immediately. That's why we have to carefully encapsulate them into the lipid nanoparticles to deliver into the particular place.
Okay.
So no need to worry about the integration of this DNA or mRNA.
Okay, thank you. So the other question that I constantly hear is, how did we get this vaccine developed so quickly? From the time that the virus was sequenced to when the vaccine was developed and we got it in the arms of our first individual, was less than a year. And normally these vaccines take 5 to 10 years at least to develop. So how did this Operation Warp Speed come into play? And the big question is, was everything done according to protocol, or were there any corners that were cut? Was safety compromised at all?
Another great question. So in vaccine or any therapeutic development, there are two stages: preclinical stage and a clinical stage, which is a process of multiple years, like you say, right? But In the preclinical stage, what we do is we develop the vaccine or a therapeutic in the lab and test them in the human cells and test them in the animals to see the safety data. And then it goes into the next stage, which is a clinical stage. So this is also a process of multiple years. But there are two reasons which the vaccine vaccine development is speed up for the coronaviruses. Number one is the advanced technological developments in the past 2 decades. Number two is additional data already available for all these methods, like I said, mRNA-based methods, adenoviral vector-based methods. They have been in the development from past several years. So we already have some safety data in the animal models. These are two. The first one is, like I said, the technological advancements. First thing we should talk about the genome sequencing. It's been almost 20 years since the first human gene was sequenced in 2001. The sequencing techniques, sequencing methodologies are drastically rapidly advanced. So, for example, in the coronavirus case, since the pandemic started in December 2019, by January 11th, the entire genome of the coronavirus was sequenced and put it on a public domain, which is available for throughout the world for everybody. That's what is the major step which led us to speed up the process of vaccine development. And immediately everybody accessed the genome data, spike particularly the spike protein genome data, and started working on developing the vaccines. Okay. And the second stage is clinical stage, right? Lots of people think that, clinical stage process also takes a longer time. Like there are 4 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and 4th phase is usually called post-market surveillance. In all these 3 phases also, as soon as you complete the preclinical studies, I think this Moderna, Pfizer, and several companies completed their preclinical studies by March 2020. This is really a rapid development, right? When they enter into the clinical stage, phase 1, based on the interim data, the FDA approved them to go with the second stage based on the safety interim data. And then all these trials are conducted in parallel, simultaneously. That's where we saved a lot of time, which comes to years worth of process came into the months worth of process. So no compromising data, no side tracks are done. Everything is properly done. And moreover, before the authorization, FDA live telecasted the process entirely. If you can go to YouTube, you can still see all 3 vaccine authorization is live telecasted. And whatever the data submitted to FDA by all these companies, they summarized and put it on a public domain. If you want, you can today still go to the FDA website. You can read and understand if you want, if you have any questions.
Perfect. Dr. Ganatra, Dr. Mehta, do you have anything to add to the information that was discussed so far about the vaccine development or Operation Warp Speed?
I mean, there's a fantastic summary of the details about each of the different vaccines. And I'll just add that when I'm counseling patients who are concerned about the rapid pace of development of the vaccines, I try to highlight that it's really the regulatory steps and these sort of financial steps that were shortened, not any of the safety or data gathering steps. I mean, we still have, large phase 3 clinical trials that we can look at and evaluate the safety of ourselves. So, I personally feel totally comfortable that no corners were cut in that process.
Thank you.
And I totally agree with that. I have reviewed all the data, and definitely all the processes for developing these vaccines were met. The only thing that was sped up was, one, we had great technology that was just summarized, and we invested in speeding the process. So while these phase 2 and 3 studies were going on, our government and many governments around the world invested in the manufacturing. So as soon as the data was ready, we could manufacture these viruses and get them in people's arms right away. So again, none of that safety requirement was cut at all.
Perfect. Dr. Deval, we talked about the 3 vaccines that are available for use in the USA. Many of us have family in India, and I hear about 2 of the vaccines there, Covaxin and Covishield. Can you explain to our audience what these 2 vaccines are? And between the 2, do you feel like one is better than the other?
Sure, I can certainly explain that. So the very first thing that I would like to say is both the vaccines are equally safe. That's what's most important thing. And then let's talk about one vaccine, each vaccine type. So let's talk about the Covaxin first. So the Covaxin is developed using one of the classical method that I mentioned in the beginning, which is whole inactivated coronavirus is used, and then they inactivated using a chemical called beta-propiolactone. They kill the virus and to develop this vaccine, right? And all the preclinical studies were properly done in mice, hamsters, and monkeys. All the safety data was publicly published in all the reputed journals. Then they moved into the clinical phase. Phase 1 to clinical stage, all the clinical trials. This is the first indigenous vaccine developed in India to fight with the coronavirus. And all the clinical trials are done in India on Indians only. Phase 1, 2, and 3. And the phase 1 and 2 data is also published recently, which is about 700 participants who participated. Safe, and presently phase 3 the clinical trials data is ongoing on 26,000 participants. All are Indians and all in Indian hospitals. All this is being done. And recently, the company announced that there is an 81% efficacy they observed in the phase 3 clinical trials. The data is in the processing, and they're going to publish in some reputed journals soon. That's what they say. And one more important thing is about this particular vaccine. They have done virus challenging studies in monkeys, which showed not only in the lungs, the viral reduction in the lungs, but also in the nose, upper respiratory tract, they observed, which means it also controls the transmission. Right? This is all about the Covaxin. So there's no doubt. And the second thing is Covishield, which is nothing but Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is also developed using the next generation platform that I mentioned, similar to the J&J vaccine, but they have used a different adenoviral vector, which is a chimpanzee adenoviral vector, to develop the vaccine. So they engineered the chimpanzee adenoviral vector with spike protein gene and injected into the human body to produce the immune response. And all the safety preclinical trials were done in the Europe, and phase 1 to 3 clinical trials also conducted in multiple countries, including Europe, Brazil, South Africa. All the data is available publicly, and it's also, this vaccine also has been approved for not approved, authorized for emergency use in multiple countries. So the same vaccine is manufactured and supplied in India as a Covishield. And also presently phase 3 clinical trials are also ongoing on this particular vaccine. About 1,600 participants are participating in the clinical trial. So this vaccine also safe. The safety data, again, as I mentioned, we have 30 years of the safety data. One more thing that I would like to mention about the Covaxin is the Covaxin vaccine development method is there from past 100 years. And most of the vaccines currently we are using are already developed in using that particular method, which means we have 100 years of the safety data on Covaxin. So not to worry about the safety at all.
Okay, perfect.
And based on the information, both are safe. So either one is fine to take. So when you ask like which one is better, so either one is fine.
Okay, perfect. So I think we all agree that we have no doubts about the technology that was used for development of any of these vaccines, and we're very confident with the approval process. And there's no reason to suspect that these should not be safe or that would cause any lasting damage to our bodies at this point. I'm going to ask one more question, Dr. Devo. So we're hearing about these variants that are developing with the COVID, the coronavirus, and for the vaccines that we've discussed so far, based on the structure, and the part of the virus that they target, do you think these vaccines are made to or would work against the variants? Is there a straight answer to that?
Sure. Yes. So the virus basic nature is to mutate and become different variants. The mutation started in March 2020, which is D614G. Now there are 3 different variants are predominantly circulating all over the world, which is B117 from UK, B1351 from South Africa, and B1128 from Brazil. All these 3 different variants have This is called antigenic drift. So virus, when you introduce the pressure on the virus, it goes into the selection pressure and then start mutating much more rapidly. Unfortunately, all these mutations are happening in the spike protein, which is the major antigen to develop the vaccines. Particularly in a small domain, like if you think this is a spike protein, there's a small domain which interacts with the ACE2 receptor in the human cell. That's where it's happening 3 or 4 mutations. But the Pfizer recently published the data that based on the in vitro studies, they took the serum from the vaccinated people and tested against all these 3 different variants, and they observed a robust neutralization and robust neutralization antibodies. But there's a little lower efficiency towards the South African variants. That's natural. But the thing is, the immune system develops hundreds of antibodies. Well, that's what they call polyclonal antibodies. It's not just 1 or 2 antibodies, multiple antibodies. Let's say 100 antibodies are attacking this spike protein. 90, for example, for the South African variant, 97 may be working, 3 may not be working. That's what is happening. That's why the efficiency may go lower. But even Moderna and J&J already mentioned that it is perfectly fine with B1351 and B117. So I do not have any questions that immediately there's a problem with these vaccines. If this becomes a new serotype or new subtypes, that's when we have to fear. But that's going to take several years. If this mutation continues, this drifting continues, and this rapid change continues, then it changes into a new subtype or serotype. To stop that, we have to focus on 2 things. Number 1 is proactive tracking. Second thing is stop circulating by following these non-pharmaceutical interventions, mask and hand sanitization and hand washing. These interventions are very, very important, even though you're vaccinated for such period of time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to ask Dr. Ganatra the next few questions. I think we covered a lot in terms of like how the vaccine is made and, the safety from, like a manufacturing standpoint and the effectiveness. Raul, we hear that the vaccines are very effective. Like we say Moderna and Pfizer, we hear that they're 94 to 95% effective. So the question that comes up is, what is effectiveness? Is this me not being able to get sick with me not being able to get infected with the virus, or can I get it, but not just show the symptoms? And then what implications does that have on virus transmission?
Great. So before I address those points, I'll just start by, I'd like to thank the North American Telugu Society for hosting us. Thank you to Dr. Rapaka for inviting us, and Dr. Dewal and Dr. Mehta, it's a real pleasure to meet you both. One of the sort of privileges of remote learning is the ability to get to meet people all across the country and the world. So thank you for being here with me. And thank you to everyone for tuning in on a Saturday to learn more about the coronavirus pandemic. So let's talk about vaccine efficacy. So the figure that you quoted, Dr. Rapaka, of 95% effective comes from 2 large peer-reviewed studies of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. And these were both published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what this essentially means is that we know from this data that the vaccines are about 95% effective at preventing symptomatic disease. We have reason to believe that they are very likely to also prevent asymptomatic disease, and I'll tell you a little bit about the data that suggests that in just a moment. But because we don't know for certain the patients in that, or because the patients in those studies were not tested unless they became ill, we can't say with 100% certainty that the vaccines are as effective against asymptomatic infection. But just to put this in context, I'd also like to say that it's really nothing short of amazing how well the vaccines work for symptomatic disease. 95%, puts these among the most highly efficacious vaccines available for any human disease. And that, coupled with the really accelerated timeline that they were able to be developed, is really kind of a miracle of modern public health and medical science. So the vaccines that are currently available in the United States, the one manufactured by Pfizer-BioNTech and the one manufactured by Moderna, as Dr. Dewal described, these are mRNA vaccines. And then the Johnson & Johnson or the Janssen vaccine, this is a viral vector vaccine. So the 95% effective figure that we've kind of been seeing in the news, that really comes from the Pfizer and Moderna studies. Johnson & Johnson hasn't yet published the paper, although the preliminary safety data has been made available to the FDA and to the general public. And we think that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is going to be in the neighborhood of about 66% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID-19. And the last thing I'll say about vaccine efficacy is that there is efficacy for different things. There's efficacy for preventing death, for preventing severe disease. And, I know it can be a little worrisome to people to think, well, I don't want to get a vaccine that's only 66% effective. But I'll just highlight that all three of these vaccines, at least early on, the data appears that they have a vaccine efficacy approaching 100% for prevention of death from COVID-19. So this is all part of why CDC's current recommendation is, don't shop around based on these characteristics. You should get the first vaccine that's available to you because we think that they're all highly safe and effective for prevention of severe disease.
Perfect. And so in short, it's not that, one vaccine, the numbers don't say it all. It's not like one vaccine is superior to the others. Whatever vaccine is available to you, take it and don't wait around, because any delay can increase the risk of acquiring infection. The next thing I want to talk about is the side effects from the vaccine. So what are the common side effects, Dr. Ganatra? And, what are the common side effects and what are the more serious side effects and how common they are?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we had a better term to describe what happens than side effects, because that makes it sound like something bad, when in reality, these are kind of expected and normal signals that your immune system is ramping up and responding to the vaccine. Before talking about side effects, I'll just make sure, I've said it so it's clear for everybody. There's no possibility that any of these vaccines currently available in the United States can cause COVID-19 disease. There is just a tiny piece of the genetic code of the virus included in these vaccines. And so, there's no way that it could acquire the rest of the genetic material. There's no possible way that these could cause COVID-19. But what they do cause is something that we call reactogenicity, which is a word that means, signals that your immune system is working. And as you mentioned, Dr. Rapaka, these are pretty common. So in the studies from Pfizer and Moderna, about 80% of experienced local reactions, and the most common of which was pain at the injection site. It's usually mild. It usually comes on in about a day and it goes away in another day or two. We do think that patients who are younger are more likely to experience local and systemic side effects because they have a sort of more robust immune response. And we also think that the side effects are more common after the second dose, because having been sort of primed by the first dose, your immune system is sort of ready to go and respond in a really robust manner. So something like 80% of people who got the Pfizer and the Moderna shot reported soreness in that arm. A little bit smaller proportion, but still substantial. In the neighborhood of 50% of people had more systemic symptoms like fatigue, muscle aches, and headache. And again, these are much more common after the second dose. So what I advise patients to do is sort of, plan ahead for that. Drink plenty of fluids. Make sure you may need to be prepared to take a day off work if the symptoms are so bothersome. I've had a few colleagues who have had to do that. But the key thing is not to worry about those expected side effects. Those are totally normal. Things that are kind of less common, things that are, should prompt you to worry and contact your physician. If you have redness or pain or swelling at the injection site that really doesn't go away after about 24 hours, if it seems like it's getting worse and not getting better. And then there's really quite rare things that at this point we don't really know if they are side effects of the vaccine or just things we happen to see in the clinical trials because we studied a large number of people. One of which is something called Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of one of the nerves controlling the muscles of the face. So it can be, a serious thing. In one of the phase 3 trials, this happened in 3 out of about 20,000 patients who received the vaccine, compared with 1 out of 20,000 patients who received the placebo. So we don't actually know yet if that's a side effect of the vaccine or if that is just normal background events that is going to happen anyway. And CDC maintains a really robust surveillance program to detect vaccine adverse events called the VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And a little bit later, I can talk about how people can enroll in a monitoring system to make sure that any side effects they're concerned about will get reported to CDC and further investigated.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the VSafe app, right, Rahul? You want to tell us, what it is and why our, community members should enroll in VSafe?
Absolutely. So VSafe is a text-based monitoring app that basically when you get your vaccine, they'll give you a little info sheet about all of the relevant things about the vaccine. And then they'll also give you a sheet about how to enroll in the VSafe program. And I did this myself when I got the vaccine. And so I've sort of had the experience of what it is. Basically what it is you give them your name, your phone number, and the date of your vaccine and which one you had. And you'll get an automated text message from CDC every other day asking you for information about symptoms, the severity, the duration. And if you have anything more serious happen than sort of the expected side effects, someone will actually contact you to sort of follow up and be able to investigate that further. So it's kind of a great automated system that can quickly put you in touch with an investigator if there's anything more concerning that needs to be investigated. Okay.
And it's also in a way our civic duty, I guess, to report these side effects and, whether or not we have them, so that, at large, we can track at a population level what's going on and outside of the clinical trials.
Absolutely.
There was debate about when I took the vaccine and you did, can we pre-treat ourselves or should we with ibuprofen and Tylenol, and can we do it afterwards? For my first shot, I didn't take. Second shot, I couldn't. I took. So I think the CDC has some guidelines about the pre-treatment and post-treatment. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention currently is recommending that people don't prophylax themselves or don't pre-treat yourself with either Tylenol or ibuprofen, and rather take those medications on sort of an as-needed basis. And it's my understanding that that recommendation is based on a sort of theoretical concern that, if you do anything to affect the inflammatory response to the vaccine, could that have an effect on the effectiveness of the vaccine? Now, I'll just say that's a very theoretical concern, and I don't think that it is going to cause any harm to take, something like Tylenol within the recommended dose limit. As a first line, what I've been counseling patients to do is if you do start to feel uncomfortable or any symptoms, go ahead and take Tylenol. It's perfectly safe. If all you have is ibuprofen or Aleve and you're feeling really crummy, go ahead and take that. We're only talking about 1 to 2 days of symptoms, so I am not very worried that anything that people do with medications for symptomatic relief is going to really create any problems. The most important thing is that people can do whatever they need to take care of themselves while they're kind of recovering from the expected side effects of the vaccine.
Great. So are there any restrictions on who should get the vaccine? Some of the questions that I got from people are if I am medicines that suppress my immunity, or if my family member has serious illness like cancer, should they take the vaccine?
Yeah, it's a good question. Early on in the vaccine rollout, we were very cautious about, paying attention to who might be at greater risk for allergic reactions. There's been a lot of study through the VSafe system, actually, sort of collecting data to see how the vaccine has functioned in the real world. And now we really know that there are really no medical conditions that should preclude somebody from getting the vaccine. And that makes sense because we know that there are a lot of medical conditions that put people at higher risk for severe outcomes from COVID-19. So, if anything, we want to make sure that we are getting vaccine to those people who are at the highest risk. Now, the one contraindication that I'm aware of, the one hard reason that a person should not get their coronavirus vaccine is if they've had a severe allergic reaction to either the first dose of the vaccine or any component of the vaccine. And the components of the vaccine that people could have an allergy to are not very common causes of allergies. Probably the two most common, or probably the two ones that people may encounter through other medications, is something called polyethylene glycol, which is used for colonoscopy preparation. And then another one is a stabilizing agent called polysorbate. So these are not common sources of allergies, and certainly not common sources of severe allergies. So when I'm counseling patients, I usually will ask if they had a severe allergic reaction to the first dose, if this is their second dose, or if in the very rare circumstance they've had a severe allergy to polyethylene glycol or polysorbate. But apart from those two contraindications, there are no restrictions on who should avoid the vaccine. There's no reason for anybody to avoid the vaccine. People with cancer, people with autoimmune diseases, people with any, history of transplantation, anything at all, people are being advised to get the vaccine. The one thing I will say that might affect vaccine timing is CDC is currently recommending people avoid getting any other vaccine within 2 weeks of 2 weeks before the first dose and 2 weeks after the second dose. And that's just to ensure that if a person is going to have a side effect or a reaction, that we kind of know what it's attributable to. So
and this will hold true for the flu shot as well. So if they're going to take flu shot and the COVID vaccine, to have 2 weeks of separation between the two.
That's correct. That's the only reason I have so far recommended that somebody reschedule a COVID vaccine appointment, is just for timing of other vaccines.
Okay. As we expand our vaccination efforts, we're going to have more and more younger people get the vaccine, and this will include people that are contemplating pregnancy, or women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. Any reasons for this particular population not to take the vaccine, or to take the vaccine?
Yeah, so it's a really important question about pregnant and breastfeeding people. As you know, those people are often excluded from clinical trials, so we often don't have as strong of an evidence base early on for how the vaccine works in those people. There are two pieces of evidence that really reassure me at this stage about the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccine in people who are pregnant or breastfeeding. And I'll just share them both with you. One is that in the Pfizer-BioNTech trial, a small number of women actually became pregnant after receiving the vaccine in the trial. I think it was 23 and 20 and change women. And so these women have been sort of followed closely and, have not seen any adverse effects. And then the other thing that really reassures me about this is the data from VSafe. As of the end of January, we have data that upwards of 30,000 pregnant people have contributed information to the VSafe database. So far we have seen kind of the expected frequency of healthy live births and pregnancies. There's really been no difference in rates of miscarriage, stillbirth, pregnancy complications. So, as we go farther into the pandemic, we have the opportunity to get more data about what's happening in the real world. And the last thing I'll just add is that we do know that patients who are pregnant or breastfeeding are at higher risk for complications from COVID-19. So, it is not the case that not getting vaccinated is necessarily a safer option despite the absence of clinical trial data, because we want to do everything possible to protect pregnant women from the outcomes of severe disease.
Perfect. Dr. Mehta, Dr. Deval, do you have anything you want to add to the vaccine, whether it's efficacy, safety, anything that we just discussed so far?
Sure. Okay, just quick, on the efficacy side, when Dr. Ganatra explained very detailed and very excellent. When you say that a 95% efficacy means, in simple terms, I will speak. Out of 100, 95 people are completely protected from infections from the COVID-19, right? And when you said 100% protect from the death, that means 100 out of 100 people are not going to die from the COVID if you have it vaccinated. So that's what I would like to add one more thing. And the second thing about the who to vaccinate, who not to vaccinate is, the current vaccines are not yet approved for the children's. The trials are ongoing right now. I think the Moderna is above 16 years, and for Pfizer BioNTech is above 12 years age group. People can get the vaccines. Here are the 2 points I would like to add.
Okay. Dr. Mehta, do you have anything to add?
I just want to echo everything that Dr. Ganatra said. I think it was an amazing summary, and the plug for the VSafe app. So we definitely have been able now to show women who are pregnant that the data from the CDC, as mentioned, over 30,000 women now, we can show that it's safe, in the sort of the symptoms of the vaccine are similar across women who are pregnant and women who are not. And then for the patients that I see every day in transplant and in oncology, we've been able to get our patients vaccinated and register them in the VSafe app. And now we're getting data back showing that, and we'll get more and more data in the coming months, showing that, again, the side effect profile of the vaccines are similar compared to age-matched non-immunocompromised patients. And then finally, I'll just say, because of this efficacy, rounding in the hospital right now, we are unfortunately still seeing some patients with COVID, but none of them have received both vaccines. And so it's really dramatic an impact, and I think we'll continue to see that impact moving forward.
That's amazing. I'm going to track a little bit away from the vaccines and talk to you all about how we're doing with, as a continuation of what you're saying, Anish, you're in the hospital seeing patients with COVID. How far did we come in terms of treatment of COVID in the last year? If someone does get COVID, despite all the precautions and while they're waiting for their vaccine, are they do they have to worry as much as they did a year ago? Are we better at treating patients and preventing deaths?
Well, thank you for that question. And first want to say what an honor it is to be on with Dr. Ganatra and Dr. Deval today. And thank you to the organizers. And on a very personal level, it's really a pleasure to be on with Dr. Rapaka, who I had the honor of training with and working with early in my career. And this is just so much fun to be on with you again today. So thank you. And getting to your question, I was on now kind of scarily in March in the hospital service as Atlanta was being hit with the pandemic. And just, watching the progress that we have all made together over the past year has been tremendous. We have importantly learned how to take care of patients with COVID-19 and educate them on how to take care of themselves and what to expect going forward. We've been able to reduce the mortality of patients admitted to the hospital with COVID-19 over the past year by learning not only what medications are effective, but also really how we organize a team approach to caring for these patients and really improve their outcomes. And importantly for me, we've also learned how to take care of our colleagues in the hospital and make sure that our response is sustainable so we can continue to take care of patients with COVID and all the other patients without COVID who importantly need their care as well. So I've seen tremendous progress, and I feel it having rounded in the hospital this past week, how much progress we've made. And it's really because we've all been working together. And most importantly, more than the treatment, it's the prevention. The vaccines that are rolling out, but really all the hard work everyone in the community has been doing of wearing masks, washing their hands, and maintaining that social distancing. That's where we've seen the biggest impact.
Perfect. So before we move on to our future, what the future holds questions, Dr. Ganatra, you have your pulse on the vaccination efforts going on in Massachusetts. Could you share with us what's the best way for our community members to find resources to get vaccinated?
Sure. As I'm sure everyone who has tried to get a vaccine appointment is aware, supply is still quite limited. And so, people are experiencing a lot of difficulty finding a place where they can get a vaccine. So I can speak to the situation in Massachusetts, and it just goes to show how variable things are state by state. Every state is kind of handling their allocation of vaccine and their rollout a little bit differently. So there's some sort of strengths and weaknesses to that approach. But in the state of Massachusetts, we have now administered about 2.4 million doses so far. And so about 12% of our population is fully vaccinated. And as far as how to, distribute the vaccine in an equitable fashion and to ensure that, everyone can get access, we still have a ways to go in making sure that we're getting the vaccine to everybody who really needs it. There's a couple resources I'll just mention. One is the sort of official Massachusetts Department of Health COVID vaccine website, and we can put the link in the chat. This website is useful. It has an eligibility checker, so you can sort of see if you are eligible for the vaccine in our current phase of the rollout. And there's also a pre-registration tool on this website that you can use so that if slots open up at any of the 7 mass vaccination sites in our state, that you can get connected with slots there. And then you can also use this tool to get connected with retail pharmacies that have slots available. And this is mass.gov/COVID-19-vaccine. And I can put this in the chat.
Okay.
There's also an unofficial Massachusetts COVID vaccination website that was made by a programmer during her maternity leave, which is kind of an amazing citizen science story. And this is macovidvaccines.com. This is a website that kind of automatically checks websites for vaccine appointment availability and updates every 5 minutes with real-time availability. And this is something that I've had several patients tell me, they've been able to secure vaccine appointment using. And then finally, for people who, senior citizens, people who don't have easy access to the internet, Boston, the Commission of Public Health has opened a hotline that any Massachusetts resident can access by dialing 211, and you can be connected with somebody who will help you make a vaccine scheduled appointment that way.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to some what can we do now, now that we're getting vaccinated and what the future looks like questions. Dr. Mehta, so for most of us who've already been vaccinated, life is not that different. We were still masking, physically distancing, hand washing, and doing everything we were told to. But just a few days ago, the CDC gave us some good news about relaxing precautions for vaccinated people. So could you go over those guidelines and tell us what kind of things that we can be more relaxed about and what should we continue to do?
Well, thank you for that question. It's definitely a question I get asked, and I'm sure all of us get asked all the time. So I think, as Dr. Duvall and Dr. Ganatra mentioned, these vaccines are very effective. And while there's still ability for people to get infected, because of how effective they are, the CDC was able to roll out some updated recommendations. And those are really exciting for many of us. So the first important update was that people who are fully vaccinated can gather indoors with other people who are fully vaccinated without wearing a mask. And what fully vaccinated means is that if you've received the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine 2 weeks after the second vaccine, you're considered fully vaccinated. That doesn't mean 100% protected, but that's the maximal protection you're going to have. And so at that point in time, you have reached that theoretical 95% efficacy. For Johnson & Johnson, it's 2 weeks after the first vaccine because it's a one-dose vaccine, and there's good data to show that after 2 weeks, you're going to have that full protection that you're going to get. So now we can gather indoors with people who have been vaccinated and not have to wear masks. You have to know whether they're vaccinated or not. But if you do, it's exciting. You can get together with your colleagues and neighbors again if they're vaccinated. The other really nice update is that you can now gather safely indoors with unvaccinated people as long as you have really good understanding of where they've come from. So it needs to be, those people need to be from one household and only one household. So it's essentially blending two bubbles, with one bubble having really good protection and the other bubble is a trust that they have been protecting themselves by wearing masks and social distancing from others and not exposing themselves. The one sort of caveat to that group is you have to make sure they are not living with somebody or you are not going to be interacting with someone that is at increased risk for severe illness. And that would be our greater than 65 years of age, people with underlying medical conditions that increase their risk for COVID. But as long as all those stipulations are met, then you can actually even get together indoors with unvaccinated individuals. And the other really helpful add-on that they had, the third sort of criteria, is that if you have been fully vaccinated, again, 2 weeks from the last vaccine, and you become exposed to someone with COVID, you don't have to quarantine. You do need to monitor your symptoms for 14 days, but you do not have to fully quarantine. And so that gives ability for people to continue their work, continue childcare, and go about their business. And those are three big advantages of receiving the vaccine. Now, everything else does stay the same. So outside of those conditions, we do need to continue to wear our mask. We need to social distance, and we need to keep our hands clean and avoid travel that's not necessary.
Okay. Yeah, and moving on to travel, that was going to be my next question. So, you know, a lot of our community members have family, including myself, in India. And, you know, approaching the summer months, it's always been a time where either we've traveled or our family members have traveled to the USA. In your opinion, what is a safe time to do this? Do we have to wait till everyone on both sides has been vaccinated, or can we travel with due precaution if at least one of the sides is vaccinated?
Yeah, that's another great question. So right now, the recommendation is still to avoid unnecessary travel. That being said, travel can be done safely and has been going on safely when it's needed to happen. So for family emergencies, for urgent needs, I think travel can be done very safely. But while we're still trying to get populations vaccinated, and there are different levels of vaccinations across the world, I think we need to still have some degree of caution. Travel, of course, is how some of these variants do move from one population to another. And so that's another reason that we need to diminish travel until we get to a higher level of immunization or herd immunity. Then we can really start to open up travel. And it is a very pressing question. My mother was actually in India in the first part of 2020, and she was supposed to come back right at the end of February. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, she got stuck in India and was in Mumbai with her sister for an additional 2 months before she got a quarantine flight back, and that came to Atlanta, and then she quarantined with us for several months. I thought she would not think about wanting to go back to India, sort of having PTSD from that quarantine experience, but now she's talking about it. And so we were just talking about that last night, like when can she go visit her sisters again? So I do think, and part of that discussion is, Mom, we got to talk to all of our family in India to get vaccinated too. And so to take whatever vaccine that they have access to because they're all safe. And so that's part of how we get back to travel, is really encouraging our community members, our friends and family to get vaccinated. And then as we build up our immunity in our community, then we'll be able to travel more.
Nice. You mentioned herd immunity, Anish. So what is that, and what percent of our population should be vaccinated to get there? And what do you think is, we can do, like in terms of like more relaxation, like how close is herd immunity gonna get us to normalcy?
Yes, that's a question that we talk about all the time. So herd immunity is the level of protection in a group of people or population that that when you achieve it significantly diminishes the chance of sustained transmission of that infection in that population. And so it's how do we build a shield around our community to protect, if even one infection comes in, protect it from moving from person to person. And we don't know the exact number yet for COVID-19. There are estimates as low as 65 or 70% and as high as 90%. And we will learn more and more as time goes on. And some of it could change with these variants. Some of the variants could be more transmissible or could not decrease the efficacy of the vaccination immunity, as has been talked about by my colleagues. So I think once we get to that herd immunity, and what we will see is reduced transmission and less person-to-person transmission within a community, and then we'll be able to relax some more of these restrictions.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to ask you is about schools. I have a 6-year-old who is doing remote for logistical issues, and just last week we were given the option of going back to school full time. And when I mentioned that, he's like, "Well, what? Is the virus gone? Why should I go back to school now? What's different?" So that's what I wanted to ask you, which is why is it safer now for our kids to go back to school full time? Both from the virus standpoint. Is there anything new that we know in terms of like physical distancing and transmission in schools? And then an add on to that question, Anish, is if there is, what should, obviously, as a community, we all agree that kids need to go back to school, but we want to consider safety as well, not only of the kids, but people at home. So what factors at a home level or a community level should we consider as we're sending our kids back to school full time?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this conversation is going on every day in our families, in our communities. It has been a tremendous impact, not only to the children, but to the parents and just the economy not to have children in school. And I think it's a really important part of this effort is to restore our normal education patterns in the United States and throughout the world. It's not only the United States that has been suffering from diminished school options for children. And I think parents have really good questions about whether they should go back to school with their children or not. And my children actually have been back in school for several months, and looking through the data and looking at the CDC recommendations, I do think schools can reopen safely when certain conditions are met. And that includes allowing the children to wear masks. And I would have to say, I've been so surprised about how great my children and all their friends are at wearing masks. I think much better than us adults are often. They remind each other to pull it above their nose, and they look out for each other, which is great to see. And they look out for their teachers because they understand that if they bring in the infection into their classroom, that not only affects them, but it could affect their teachers, and they love their teachers, which is great to see as well. So I think if we have the right infrastructure in place, schools can reopen even before everybody has been vaccinated. So it's important for parents to work with the schools to make sure that they have the adequate support to achieve those sort of ways of protecting the teachers and the students. And then thinking about, as you know, as parents, do you feel safe letting your children go back? If you don't, that's fine. If you have the option to do virtual learning, then that's also okay. So I don't think anyone should feel bad about sending their children to school or keeping their children at home. You have to make the right decision for your family and also the right decision for our community. There are obviously families that have less means and less ability to keep their children home while continuing to work and earn money for their family. And we should give opportunities for those families to have childcare and have safe schools. If you feel that you have the means to keep your children at home and they can get a good level of education there, then that should be a consideration for your community as well. And so I think it's going to not be the same answer for every family in every community, but these conversations have been very productive, and I think they need to continue to go on so that we can get more and more children back into school.
Do you think there's any rationale in waiting for adults at home to complete their vaccination before kids go back to school? Is there any logic behind that or reason to do so?
So one of the things that I've talked about with my patients who received organ transplants and their children is if they feel safer once they've received the vaccine to then allow their children to go back to school, or should they wait until they get the vaccine? And I think, you know, with the right conditions, even patients who are immunocompromised, their children can go back to school safely. But if they have a concern and they don't feel comfortable, then they can keep their children at home until they've received the vaccine. But what I tell them is once they've received the vaccine and the schools they know the schools are doing the right thing, then they should feel very comfortable. And I would recommend, if they would like to send their kids back to school, then to go ahead and do so. But again, it gets back to, we have to all be in it with our schools, and we have to help our schools be able to do the right things. And, you know, there are schools with different means, and we're fortunate to be in a school that has a lot of opportunity to protect the children, but we've all contributed to that. And so we need to do that in each one of our communities.
And talking about kids, where are the clinical trials that are looking at immunization in kids at, and when do you think we'll be starting to vaccinate our kids? And this question also comes up, Anish, is if we think our kids are okay and safe to go back to school now, and infection rates in kids are low, is there even a need to ramp up the vaccination efforts in kids?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So let me start with the last question first. So I do think it's important to think about vaccination in our children and pediatric populations, because while there is less sort of impact often to children who get infected, we definitely see children get severely ill. And unfortunately, we don't always know when children have an underlying immunocompromised state, or have or even sometimes have a sort of smoldering disease that then gets unleashed when they get infected with COVID. So it's really important to protect our children and find the ways to do that. And there are good ways to do that, vaccines being one of them. So I think as we move forward, vaccinating children are going to be very important to protect them, to protect their teachers, and to protect our community, and particularly grandparents. So now going into the vaccine trials. So the initial Pfizer studies of their vaccine was done in 16 and above. And so in the United States, that vaccine is approved for 16 and above if the state opens it up to those groups, that age group. Moderna, their study, the big study that they did called the COVD study, was 18 and above. Now, both companies have gone back and enrolled patients in studies of younger groups. So Pfizer just recently completed their enrollment of 12 to 16-year-olds. And they did a couple different things. They did a placebo-controlled study, and then they also did a dose-finding study. And those data should be out pretty soon, we hope. And so we will learn how well these vaccines work as in that group. Same thing with Moderna. They just finished enrolling in their study that was called Teen Cove, which is kind of a cute name, I think, where they enrolled children 12 to 18 years of age and gave them 2 doses of the Moderna vaccine. And we should hopefully have data from that study pretty soon as well. And once the FDA reviews these data and they find the appropriate bridges, what they call bridges, so translation to the adult data, then they will approve, hopefully, these younger groups to get it. And then those companies will move on to do studies in the 6 to 12-year-old categories and continue to build that data set. And it's looking at not only safety, but how good do these vaccines work on creating immunity in the younger groups as well. And so those important pieces of data should be out hopefully soon, and that will inform parents of what to do. In the meantime, what I've been doing, so I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I have, they know me as a clinical trialist and a researcher as well as a clinician. But I've been talking to them about the importance of clinical studies to understand how we help each other. And so I have been talking to them slowly but surely on our drives to school about these studies. And so what I am encouraging them to do is when it opens up for 6 to 12-year-olds, for them to volunteer to be in it, to be part of history, be part of protecting themselves and protecting their community. And it's starting to register, I hope, with them, and they're seeing some of their friends also think about it. And so hopefully as we move forward, this is, again, something we go through together, and the children want to be part of it, and so we should let them be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Nice, and that actually leads into my next question, which I will allow all 3 of you to answer. So one of the things I'm extremely proud about the Telugu community and the Indian community in the Boston area is how much they have given back to the community at large during the pandemic, especially. Right from PPE distribution, mask making, food drives, fundraising, and their efforts continue to do so and are very inspiring. So going forward, what can our community members do to, what are additional ways in which they can contribute to ending the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of the wonderful benefits of being part of a larger Indian community. And it's true for many ethnicities around the United States as well. So my mother and her group of friends who have all been checking on each other. And when someone can't go to the grocery store or can't cook for whatever reason, they're helping each other. And I think that will continue to go on. It's very much part of who we are. And we need to continue to do that and teach the next generation to do that as well. And that's one thing I've been seeing as well, is also the children and the teenagers and the young adults wanting to help their community and encouraging them and giving them the opportunities to do so. And then the one final thing, I think, Aparna, you and I had talked about this before. One of the really rewarding things that for me personally, that I've been able to contribute to is really helping those who have difficulty finding the vaccines or difficulty navigating the registration sites to register for the vaccine. And so for my mother, my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law and their friends, my wife and I have been online helping them register, getting them in, and then also using our social media platforms. So anytime I hear about a vaccine being available or extra doses being available somewhere, just getting that out there to the community so that they know and they can get it, or easy ways to find a vaccine. Like Massachusetts has that great statewide registration system. Georgia finally got one too. And so now we've been pushing that out and on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever means you think you can to really help those who have trouble getting vaccines, finding the vaccines, just helping them out. I think it's a great effort that all of us can do for our community.
Dr. Deval, do you have any suggestions for community efforts?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that the community has already started doing it by organizing this program today. That's one of the important things that they are doing. And probably, participating in neighboring schools, helping the neighboring schools for the kids, bringing them back to the school. That's also another thing, because our community is huge in the Boston area. So that's another thing that they can do. So, and also, I agree with all whatever Dr. Mehta said. Yeah, we can help as a community, as an individual, to spread the word out about the vaccination, about the misconceptions about the vaccinations, hesitancy, all this stuff.
How about you, Dr. Ganatra? Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, on top of those fantastic suggestions, the only things I can think to add as far as what our community can do to protect ourselves, I mean, this is the time to stay vigilant and to really resist the urge to kind of give in to the fatigue of getting lax about mask use or distancing. This has been a marathon and not a sprint. And as we get close to the finish line, I mean, this is not the time to let up. And then, as Dr. Mehta is saying, to really check in on your friends and family. I would encourage everybody listening to kind of use your voice to talk with your friends, and particularly friends and family who may have concerns or may be hesitant about getting the vaccine. Hearing from a friend you trust or a family member you trust about your experience is actually one of the most powerful things that can shape someone's decision making. So don't be afraid to use your voice. And then finally, there are in every state ongoing volunteer efforts. If people are interested in rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty with volunteer efforts, I know in Massachusetts the Public Health Commission accepts volunteers for everything from doing the actual vaccinations, which I've had the privilege to do now, to helping with the logistics of the mass vaccination sites. People can sign up to work as contact tracers for states. So there's a variety of response-directed volunteer efforts that are available in communities, and I encourage people to look into those as well.
That's great. Dr. Deval, do you have any message or message for our audience or viewers from India, both in terms of vaccination as well as for protecting themselves in other ways?
Sure, yeah. So I think, in terms of getting over this pandemic, our country is doing great with the support of people. And, we have developed our own indigenous vaccine and it's rolling out. Not only that, but also we took vaccines from the rest of the world and then started manufacturing them, not only supplying to the India, but also the rest of the world. Our country is doing an amazing job in that. And right now, to control this, recently hearing some surge in the cases in Maharashtra is a little bit troublesome, but, with the support from the people, if they follow all the guidelines and guidances, or whatever the experts are explaining, such as, using the face mask, washing the hands, sanitizing the hands, maintaining social distancing, avoiding social gatherings for a certain period of time, and not to worry about which vaccine to get. At least to get a vaccine, you're protected if you get a vaccine rather than not getting a vaccine. So these things they have to keep in mind, and then continue doing this thing for next several months, and then we will be successfully overcoming this pandemic.
I think we have some audience questions, and I'll take some of them. This is something that I've actually wanted to include in my school opening question. Anish, for you. Our schools are going down from 6 feet to 3 feet physical distancing. And I think there was one study, right, Dr. Ganatra, that one of our colleagues had published, right? All three of you, if you have anything to weigh in on, like, why is do we have additional data now that say 3 feet is enough? Or are we actually compromising on our kids' safety by limiting physical distancing to 3 feet at schools?
Very important question, and I should say this is a sort of conflict of interest for me because I know and have deep respect for the author of the paper. But there, just a few days ago, a paper was accepted in one of the kind of major infectious disease journals that looked at this question of whether or not community rates of COVID went up in schools where distancing of 3 feet was allowed as compared with 6 feet. And this is, by no means a perfect answer to the question, but it does, suggest that, the absence of widespread transmission following adoption of 3 feet distancing compared with 6 feet distancing, it does increase our confidence that in a setting where we are already very attentive to prevention of transmission, as Dr. Mehta described, with masks. There's other environmental things we can do, like increasing ventilation as well. But this was kind of very exciting for many of us in the community who are engaged in these discussions, because it's just another piece of evidence supporting that schools can be reopened in a safe manner if we are attentive to the right things. Oh, Aparna, you're still muted.
So so that was one of that's actually great that you reviewed the literature, Dr. Ganatra, because based on the same literature, I made a decision to send my son back to school next month, and he's excited about it as well. Dr. Diggle, I have a question for you from the audience. Would there be a transition into mRNA vaccines only in the future? With the new mRNA technology, is there a hope for a HIV vaccine in the horizon? And I'll let Dr. Mehta also weigh in after you.
Great question. Yes. So, is there? There will be a transition of vaccine. This is another major groundbreaking step of vaccine developments, having these mRNA vaccines successful on fighting COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, there is going to be a transition, but these are not only going to be the options. We still, let's say, for example, from 100 years, we have been using these inactivated viruses to develop the vaccine. We're still doing it. We're still using it. So that kind of option mRNA vaccines can become. But in my opinion, this first success is going to revolutionize the medicine by developing more therapeutics towards more chronic diseases and cancers. I think that's where this is going to play a huge role to fight with the other diseases. That's what I would think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in general, one of the brighter linings of this pandemic is that we've pivoted and revolutionized a lot of things, doing things differently, whether it's telemedicine and medicine or, cutting the bureaucratic process to get vaccines approved. So we know that we can do things differently. And I guess the other benefit is the vaccine development as well.
And the other point that you mentioned about can we have a vaccine for HIV? Yes, that is there is a possibility, right? We have been struggling to have a vaccine from several years for HIV infections. I know we had some success and failures, success and failures. We went all the way close to getting the vaccine, and then we went back. So there is a hope. Certainly there is a hope, and then that's a very positive hope, I would say.
So, Dr. Mehta, you one of the things I did not mention in your bio is that you're also a member of the Serious Infectious Diseases Center at Emory, and you have experience with the Ebola virus, infections as well. What is your take on this mRNA platform and the knowledge that we've gained from the coronavirus, whether it be from a pandemic standpoint or, a vaccination standpoint or treatment? How is that going to affect your future, affect the future of other diseases?
Yeah, so that's a great and interesting question. And I want to say 100% agree with Dr. Deval that we have really well-established vaccine technologies that will continue to move forward. And this mRNA technology just brightens our future for creating a diverse group of vaccines to really look at all sorts of threats to human health, and not only infectious disease, but I think really great opportunities in cancer as well. And us, that work in biocontainment and emerging infections, we're part of this network across the United States and across the world. And we've actually, well before the corona pandemic, had been very interested in the future of mRNA vaccines. And had, they've been trying to develop vaccines for some of these emerging infections in the past, including influenza. So one of the things that, we've been worried about for a decade, and we had this wonderful pandemic plan for a novel influenza outbreak that we sort of borrowed a lot from for the coronavirus outbreak. But part of that plan was to be able to rapidly develop a vaccine to prevent the spread. And that's what these mRNA and viral vectored vaccines have really given us now. And so I'm looking forward to these platforms moving forward so that when we do have an outbreak somewhere in the world, we can quickly develop a vaccine to help protect that community and the global community. And then that gets into the point is how these vaccines really open the door to that continuing sort of mantra that we've been trying to put out there, is that when there's an outbreak or an event in one part of the world as it is now, that affects all of us. And so these sort of platforms really allow us to get into much more of a global health community, not only for these outbreaks, but for the day-to-day things that affect populations across the world. So I'm very optimistic that these platforms will lead to more and more protective mechanisms for people here in the United States and all over the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have another question, and this was actually asked by one of the students on our team yesterday. So she was asking if you foresee a need for a booster in a few months for vaccines, whether it be, because we don't, at this point, I guess we don't know how long the immunity lasts, both from that end, as well as because of the variants that are coming up. Dr. Dewald, do you want to take this? Dr.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the booster dose, I'm not quite sure about the booster dose, but if these variants keep raising, but already this, like Dr. Mehta said, the speed of the vaccine development. So Moderna and Pfizer already started developing multivariant vaccines. For example, you're using only a spike protein that encodes wild type or D614G variant, but now you can include other variants mRNA, then you can develop a multivariant spike protein. In addition to that, there are a few companies that are developing pan-coronavirus vaccine. Not only this single variant, but also multiple subtypes, MERS coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 1, SARS coronavirus 2, all together can be, we can get protection from all of these different subtypes, not only the variants. That's what I'm looking forward to. Not just whatever the vaccine that we have available, give another boost. That's not probably a good idea. May not be a good idea, but moving forward, next step, for example, like a multivariant vaccine or pan coronavirus vaccine. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Dr. Ganatra Mehta, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just underscore the proactive plan for stopping the emergence of variants is definitely the one thing we know we can do with the tools we have right now, which is, cutting off opportunities for the virus to replicate and mutate and create even more variants. So, I hear in Dr. Dewal and Dr. Mehta's input, even more reasons why we should encourage people to get the vaccine if they can.
Get vaccinated and don't give in to the fatigue. Continue to physically distance, hand wash, and mask up.
And stop circulating the vaccine.
Yeah. So another question I got was, is there any role in checking antibodies after the first doses of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines and deciding who should get the vaccine, the second dose, or deciding whether you need a second dose or not. And this ties into the vaccine distribution inequities, as well as worldwide. You know, in the United States, 10% of our population is fully vaccinated, but across the world, it's only 1%. From the most recent data. So in terms of like getting the vaccine into more arms and as quickly as possible, is there a role in checking antibodies or even otherwise and limiting it to just the first dose?
So let me start out, and then I would love to hear my colleagues' opinions on this as well. So I do think there's a real interest and necessary interest in whether we can do one dose of these vaccines versus 2 doses to really broaden the opportunity for people to get it. With the data that we have now, we don't know with 1 dose if there's sustained protection. That's the limitation right now. We do know, particularly with the Pfizer vaccine, but also with the Moderna vaccine, that there is some level of protection after 1 dose, but we just don't know how long that lasts because the studies were just not designed to approach that question. And so right now, I would advise people to get 2 doses of the vaccine that's available to them. I would also advise people not to spend money on checking antibody levels for a couple reasons. One, that the antibody tests that are out there in the United States, at least, they have different targets. And so the vaccines target the spike protein. And so if you have an antibody test that's pretty robust at detecting spike antibodies against the spike protein, you will see a response, but it doesn't tell you if you were previously exposed to coronavirus or if you got that response due to the vaccine. Now, if you get tested with antibody tests that don't target the spike protein, then you'll see potentially a negative test after a coronavirus vaccine. And I've had several patients who've done that. They've gotten the test not knowing what the target was, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't respond to the vaccine. It was unfortunately because they got a test that didn't detect the antibodies that their vaccine induced them to make. They spent a lot of money, unfortunately, on that. And so I would advise people to have the confidence. The data is very robust that with 2 doses of the vaccine, the vast majority of us will have very good immune responses and not to spend money on these tests. Now, if you're really interested in doing it, then as a scientist, I would encourage you to find a study where they're tracking how people respond to the vaccine over time. And I know there are several of them, colleagues in Boston, who are doing that and all over Massachusetts. So I would encourage you to do that so you can contribute to the larger scientific knowledge base for this. But I do think there will be studies going forward that will try to understand whether 1 dose is sufficient, at least for certain populations. And the sort of the coming data that I expect to see very soon is, and we've seen some of this already published, 1 dose after a previous infection. Is that good enough? And I think we may see recommendations coming regarding people who were previously infected with COVID, whether 1 dose of these 3 approved vaccines will be good enough for them, or if they need to go on and get 2. Ferdinand, I think you're on mute again.
Okay.
That's all I have in terms of audience questions. Both on behalf of myself as well as the Telugu Association of Greater Boston and the North American Telugu Society, thank all 3 of you so very much for taking time off your very busy schedule and for your advice and sharing your expertise. I think our collective message is vaccination is safe, get vaccinated, and that this is the surest and safest way of putting an end to the pandemic. So yes, thank you very much, and thank you for all our audience members who have tuned in by YouTube, Facebook, or on the TAGB radio. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Bye. Take care. Bye. Very nice to meet you, both of you, Doctor.
You as well.